the Eagles are the better team, and the Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl.
Welcome back to another episode of Eagles Edge. I'm live here with Jimbo, who was highly praised. Great reception for you and Alex last week. So I thought, what better way to continue forward than to bring you back? Um, we have a big matchup coming up this week against the Vikings. A lot of people have talked about this is kind of a crossroads moment for the Eagles. Are they going to get to 5-2, beat a defense that is kind of poised to give the Eagles offense problems, or are they going to lose their third straight and the sky is falling? So I'll bring, as people are coming in here, people will watch this back, but we're going to have some live viewers. And as you guys filter in, I invite you to ask questions. What is your initial impressions, I guess, of the Eagles season as a whole, and then coming into this matchup against the Vikings?
So after last week, I last week was a little bittersweet in that, a lot more bitter than sweet. Um, I think at the end of our show, in my inaugural prediction, I had the Eagles losing by 4. I think I had it as a really low scoring game, 17-13 or 14-10. I think I had 14-10. Um, and it wasn't that low scoring, but the Eagles did lose by 4. So I would love to be a little bit more optimistic, and as we talk about it through the day here, um, I think crossroads is a really good way to put this matchup. In that, I think this really is kind of a crossroads moment for the Eagles season. And I think this game is almost a crossroads moment. And like I said, we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail in a bit. But personally, I could see this game going one of two ways. And I think the two ways are dramatically different from one another. And I'm very curious to see which one. And I think whichever one happens could, as you're suggesting, maybe set the tone for the rest of the year here. Um, I think I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic this week than last week. We'll see. Maybe you'll talk me out of that. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I definitely think this is a pretty watershed moment. Um, Especially, and I'm hogging the mic here, but especially because this is a similar last year. It feels a little similar in that last year we got off to a bit of a slow start. I remember there was fire Sirianni talk after the 2-2 start last year, and then we had our glorious bye week where the Eagles had the bye and came out as a dramatically improved team after the bye. Felt like a whole nother season almost. This obviously isn't a bye, but it is a 10-day break in between these two games. Uh, Also relatively early in the season, just like last year. Also after a bit of a rough start, just like last year. So again, not the same. It's not a bye week, so I don't know that the coaches can have that much dramatic happen. But man, would that be nice if some magic happens in this extended break that they've had.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting into this matchup, it really is two struggling offenses against some good defenses. Now, of course, with the Eagles shorthanded against the Giants, they didn't look like a good defense. But I think most fans would agree that when they're healthy, they're still a solid defense. And getting into just that this is from NFL Oasis, my site, which is essentially an upgraded version of EPA, but it takes in the opponent strength into account and some other stuff. And you can see, like, against some solid offenses, they're putting up 75th percentile performances. That's really good.
Yeah.
Um, they started to fall off against Denver. Obviously, that second half was a big collapse on the defensive side of the ball, and then it just bottomed out against New York. And it's one of these things where until you actually don't have Quinyon Mitchell and Jalen Carter on the field, you take them for granted. And then when they're not there, you're like, oh crap, we're maybe only one or two players away from not only being not a good defense, but potentially a bad defense. And this is against a Giants team that is not chock full of weapons. So what do you take away from that defensive performance? Is it something they can just throw in the bin and move forward as Carter and Mitchell come back in, or is there areas for concern?
I would so I have very little words to defend the defense in the Giants game. Um, that was bad. The numbers show it. The performance shows it. The Denver game, again, I don't want to jump to the defenses, jump to save the defense or anything like that. In this situation, they need to play well, and they didn't play very well. But in that Denver game, uh, you hold a team to 3 points through 3 quarters. You expect to, if you hold a team to 3 points through 3 quarters or almost 3 quarters, you expect to have a lead, a sizable one that can allow your defense to tee off. It forces the other offense to be one-dimensional, which can allow your pass rushers to pin their ears back. It can allow everyone to sit on various play calls and tendencies. The Eagles' offense did not provide that. And again, I don't want to constantly just give excuses to the Eagles' defense. They need to do better, but they're not getting a whole lot of help. The offense is frequently anemic. I believe you could correct me if I'm wrong. I believe I saw our offense leads the NFL in 3 and outs, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Real quick, I'm not sure if we're getting any live guys coming in, so let me just give this a quick refresh and see if we can see people populating.
Roger. Always love tech issues. You're back.
All right. So I can see people. And if you are in the live chat, I would encourage you to write in your questions. I think we'll be able to see them now. Apologies if they weren't showing up initially. But okay, great. I can now see some chat. So appreciate everyone who's here and keep going.
So yeah, I think you don't want to make too many excuses for the defense, but man, for an offense that leads the NFL in 3 and outs, it makes it hard on the defense. They need to do better. But if they can get some help from the offense, I think they will do better, especially in that Denver game. I have a lot less to say about the Giants game, but in that Denver game, I feel like the defense really did its job for a significant portion of the game. And then, got tired and wore down, and Denver started to figure them out, and like that's going to happen. But man, you hold a team to 3 points through that much of the game, you expect to win the game, and we did not do that.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to go back and look because although they did keep them down on the scoreboard, I think Denver was still able to move the ball.
They were.
One thing that I thought was notable from that matchup was they didn't give up on the run game. And
Yeah.
you just think about juxtaposing that with the Eagles offense. They're out of halftime. They're the 32nd ranked offense in almost every major stat. And it harkens back to adjustments. And what does those conversations look like in the locker room? So turning it over to the offensive side here briefly, what is your overall feeling? Like, obviously, we've ad nauseum covered all the problems with the offense. And I guess I would ask you, what's the lowest hanging fruit? What can they fix in this next game and build on going forward that's going to bear fruit?
So if you don't mind, I might kind of I have a bit of a theory about how this week may go, and I'm going to kind of jump in now, and it might meander a bit. But I mentioned earlier how I think this is a big turning point and how this game can go one of two ways. You made a good point earlier as well that these are two good defenses and that this Vikings defense is set up to do a lot of things well against the Eagles, right? This is an excellent passing defense against Eagles passing game that is struggling. It's a highly complex defense against an Eagles offense that is trying and failing, I think, to be read based, right? I feel like I think the Eagles are still pushing the ball down the field, but I think you consistently see opportunities where it's like you got AJ one-on-one out there, man. Let's throw him the ball, and instead we have some poorly conceived concept that comes out, and Jalen tries to read it, and it falls apart because it's not well designed, and etc. Right? Bad concepts are definitely not going to work against this Vikings pass defense. They are well coached, well organized, and confusing. All right. This is going to be a rough game. I don't want to criticize Jalen. I think he's actually had a really good year, but I still think I wouldn't say Jalen is like a master at reading defenses pre and post snap or anything like that. He's done pretty good with it, probably better with it this year than many others, but I still wouldn't say it's like his bread and butter. And this is a defense that is hard to read. They are complex with a lot of post snap movement, a lot of disguise. So, getting a little bit to my point here, I think this game could go in one of two ways. Either the Eagles continue to do what it is that they've been doing, and if they do that, I think they will struggle mightily against this Vikings defense. Or we could read into, there was some reporting on an interview with Saquon Barkley. Barkley came out this week and talked about a team meeting that they had, an offensive team meeting, where he came out and said he was extremely excited about the direction that the team is moving, and he can't wait to see it in play. Now, players say things all the time. You can take it for what it's worth, but I have to wonder, maybe there's an emphasis here on, hey, Vikings have this complex defense. They are not good against the run. And, their corners are not bad, but not elite. I have opinions about Isaiah Rodgers. I think he's good, but I still think we got rid of him for a reason. I have to wonder if the Eagles might finally have this be the game where, hey, we're going to bust out the run game. Jeff Stoutland is still the run game coordinator. We didn't forget how to run the ball from last year, this kind of very vanilla run game that we've had these past few weeks. I feel like potentially some of the concepts that we've been looking for, dying to see out of the run game, maybe they come back this week. Maybe the offense decides, hey, we're going to take some of these outside shots against these corners, especially with this complex defense that's going on. I think if the Eagles decide to do that and it works out, man, that could be this new identity that maybe Saquon is so excited about. I don't know.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, you could see he was just like grinning ear to ear. But then it's kind of funny looking that juxtaposed with Hurts, who kind of, my read on it was that there was some skepticism from him about the meeting. And actually, he kind of comes right out and says, like, oh, we've been aimlessly trying to find our identity. We haven't been able to do that. There's issues without, going ahead overtly saying it. Like, there's issues with, the play calling, and a myriad of other things. I'd love to actually just break it down because I do think it was pretty revealing what he said in his last press conference. And it would indicate like, oh, maybe they're going to lean on the run. And you come into this, like the Vikings, I wrote this in our preview article for our Patreon members would have seen this, is the Vikings defense, their pass defense, the difference between them and number 2, because they're number 1, is the same gap as number 2 to number 10. Now, some of that's based off like these fumble returns for touchdowns and pick sixes and playing really bad quarterbacks, it is inflated, but they're still really good. And then you get into their run defense and they're like 25th in the league.
Yeah.
And you can see their interior D linemen getting blown off the ball. You can see the back seven preemptively trying to converge into the middle because of that. And then their runs bounce outside and there's no one home. And so the Eagles can come into this game and think, okay, we have opportunities to establish the run, especially on the outside. Now, there's other factors here. Blake Cashman might be coming back. Outside chance, Andrew Van Ginkel may be coming back. That's a totally different defense with those guys in there. Now the run game's probably not nearly as vulnerable. Harrison Smith getting his legs under him. Now, you talked about...
I did just check today. Cashman was a full participant with his hamstring injury. Van Ginkel was limited with the neck injury, but did practice. So you're on to something there for sure.
I was on a Vikings Insider podcast. It's actually playing right now. And they said Cashman is pretty much going to play. Van Ginkel is doubtful. So one of the things you mentioned was how they are a highly complex defense. They, have a lot of different pressure looks, a lot of different coverage rotations. So I put together this chart, which looks at how often an offense faces a various coverage and how often a defense employs that coverage, and then how good are they at that coverage. So you can just look, the more to the right, offense faces that coverage or defense uses that coverage, higher up on the graph, the better they are against that. And the reason these are green is because that's the total EPA leader. So because even though you can see the Eagles are offense is better against cover 6,
they don't face it much.
They face cover 1 more and they do really good against it. So that's their best coverage. That goes back for years. This is just for 2025, but you can go back for years and that holds true. And look at their bugaboo. Cover 2, they face it the second most often and they're terrible against it, which, humble brag, I talked about how bad they were against cover 2 in the offseason and all the reasons for it. Now, here's where it gets even worse. The Vikings use league high rates of cover 2, and they're amazing at it. They have a million different versions of it. They have it from different personnel packages, different alignments, different rotations behind it, different stunts and pressures with it. So on and so forth.
They'll even do the pretty rare showing single high and rotating back into cover 2, which is not something you see all that much because you have to have a safety that will flip his hips and sprint his butt back there to have that cover 2 responsibility, depending on how they do it. But they'll even do that sometimes, which is wild.
From various charting services, you'll see obviously different numbers, but overall, against all dropbacks, they're in cover 2 or a variation of it roughly 1/3 of the time. This is extremely high percentage. Now, if you only look at shotgun dropbacks, because I went through and I watched every single shotgun dropback for the Vikings, I didn't chart it, but you're talking close to 50%. It was almost half the snaps. They were in some version of cover 2. So I'm guaranteeing that they're going to be running an insanely high number of snaps of cover 2. Because there's no reason for them not to. Like, yes, everyone knows they like cover 2. You don't want to be predictable, but when you have so many different versions of it from so many different looks and so many different rotations, it doesn't matter necessarily that that's the base coverage, because the way you get there changes the interfacing with the offense. So it's not like you can get on a whiteboard and be like, okay, here are our cover 2 beaters, we're good to go. You have to look at the specific versions that they're running with these specific alignments, and that's how you attack it. And it is a little bit futile to just discuss here verbally, like, oh, if they're in this version, I think the Eagles should run this. But in general, glance routes where you're releasing inside of the cover 2 corner. So in general, those guys stay in the flats. They don't if there's no one to hold them, they'll sink 10 to 12 yards down the field. If there's someone in the flat, they won't drop back as far. And obviously they're trying to take away like any quick in-breaker, out-breaker if the player just runs a hitch. And if you run inside of them and vertical release, generally they're going to let you go. They're not going to attach to that route. And then you kind of run this a little bit more of an angle than a skinny post. So you gain depth as you do that. So there's a window behind that hook curl defender to the immediate inside of the corner, but you're still in front of the safety. And the Eagles did well on that type of concept last year to AJ Brown. There's an opportunity to hit those glance routes for sure. Double post. We saw it. Was it the first or second game where they hit that big bomb to Jahan Dotson? Was that the second game against the Chiefs? I think it was, right?
I think it was.
Yeah, they hit they cover the way they run cover two, their structures, they're vulnerable to the double post. And another big one is when you vertical release from like a condensed alignment, they're going to let you run straight at the safeties. Well, the safeties are going to give ground if you run straight at their toes, and then you have a timing route where you just stop and turn around at 15 to 18 yards. There's an opportunity for a chunk gain there. Then you mix in some running back screens, quarterback scrambles up the middle. That's where I feel like you can attack them. Now, conversely, if you sit back in 2x2 static, take 5 to 7 step dropbacks and run China and wrap in, you're toast.
Yeah.
There is 0% chance of that working. Number one, because the only way you're actually going to deliver the ball is in a super tight window that's perfectly timed. And because of turnover aversion and the way Hurts's releases and the way the receivers kind of try to operate in zone, that's a tall task.
Not to mention they have a good pass rush.
That's the second part.
Yeah.
If your first read is taken away, by the time you get backside, you're sacked.
Yep.
So, you can watch so many snaps where teams will, try to run some type of, flood concept where they're trying to conflict some zone defender. And the Vikings, they read the quarterback's eyes. There's two things that kind of, I think, are emblematic of their defense is they read the quarterback's eyes and they move aggressively based off that. And they attach to routes really aggressively. So like when you're in match zone, there's two basic versions where you have spot drop or country coverage where it's like Madden, you're just covering an area of the field. And some teams run that. The Giants actually run a deep zone coverage like that, and the Eagles had success, perhaps maybe because they're in a lot of spot drop. Whereas the Vikings, it's a quasi man. They're there. If you're the hook curl and a guy runs vertical, boom, I'm running deep downfield. I'm carrying the guy 40 yards downfield. I've matched him. And that's where you have the opportunity for the quarterback scrambles, especially up the middle. But if we know anything about Hurts, he tends to break the pocket outside. And then you have those guys like Grenard chasing him.
Yeah.
That's not a formula for success. So just from what you heard about how the Vikings defense is likely to play and knowing the strengths and weaknesses of the Eagles offense, like what do you foresee? Do you think that they're going to come in with a good plan against that?
If they do come in with a good plan against that, I think what it will look like is when we see that too high shell. Now, they don't always show the too high shell. They disguise it a lot. But if you have an inkling that it's cover two, and if you've got your two deep safeties and you've got this 25th ranked rushing defense, pound the rock. And if the Vikings take steps to finally try to take that away, if they start loading the box, if they start showing and playing single high, right? If they start giving you one-on-one opportunities outside, take your shots. I think this is a pound the rock and throw the ball down the field game. Like you said, do not try to play in these short intermediate areas. There are a few concepts, as you mentioned, that can work against them. But, if the Eagles go to some of their rough bread and butter that does not work against these concepts, they're going to struggle. So get out of that stuff. Pound the rock and throw it deep. Because maybe controversial opinion here as well. I know Isaiah Rodgers has played very well this year, and I do think he is a good corner. I think some of the reaction of, like, oh, why did we let him go? He would have been perfect. He's great, is maybe a little overblown. He's had a very good year, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he'd be having a good year anywhere. Um, but we saw issues with him last year. He was not, it wasn't like every opportunity that he had to come on the field, he was amazing. He just didn't have many opportunities. He had some opportunities and he came on and he wasn't bad, but he wasn't great, particularly at the catch point. He was not great at the catch point. If the Vikings start loading the box in order to stop us from pounding the rock, and I have AJ Brown outside on Isaiah Rodgers, I would want Hurts chucking that ball up.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Rodgers. I certainly think they should have signed him for $5.5 million. And now there's some like conflicting reports where Ed Kratz came out and said, no, the Eagles wanted to sign him, which I thought was funny that how that came out of the blue, especially with the Vikings game. And obviously it's going to be at the forefront, like how the Eagles need a corner badly.
Yeah.
And I do wonder to what extent is that the front office being like, hey, no, we actually tried. And then Isaiah came out and said the media is lying. And we're never going to know the truth on it. But I just think about Occam's razor. Like, what incentive does he have, Isaiah? Does he have to lie about it? Did they actually give him a competitive offer? I'm skeptical about it, especially because they seem to go right in the free agency and sign someone who seems like he would fill his role for like a veteran minimum right after. Yeah. So we'll never know. But yes, obviously, I wish we had Rodgers on this team.
Yeah. To be clear,
go ahead.
At the price that we got him, I would do that as well. It's just when it happened, I understood why, and obviously maybe that decision hasn't worked out all that well, but it's a process over results moment, and like I understood the process. He was not perfect. He had some catch point issues. Maybe they felt overly confident in Ringo. I understand why they made the decision that they made. I do still think we could pick on him if we get the opportunity, though.
So we got a question here from Comrade who asks, would the Vikings even gain much by disguising coverage, given how weak the Eagles have been against cover 2? And it's an interesting question. I think disguising coverage is a double-edged sword. Number one, if you make the quarterback process, post-snap processing, slow down to give your rush a chance to get home, to make him doubt his eyes and potentially make a mistake, that's great. If you get your team players out leveraged because you're sticking them here and then they have to go over there and then you lose the speed outs, which by the way, the Vikings lose the speed outs all the time, that's where it can hurt you. Now, one thing I want to talk about with Flores is he seems to run his defense in a way where he goes, to beat us, either you're going to have to make some tough plays like honey hole shots up the sideline against cover 2 where the corner's sinking and the safety's working over, or are you going to run enough running back screens, quarterback scrambles up the middle, third and medium, like draw plays? Are you going to run enough of that kind of stuff to keep us honest? And the pro style offenses, they don't do that. They go, oh, we'll sprinkle that stuff in, some of our scheme stuff, some of our, game plan specific installs. But if you want to succeed against an unorthodox defense, you might have to run a ton of those type of concepts. And I liken it to the Commanders' offense, where they're so unconventional that when you just have 1 week preparation in the regular season, it's not like you're going to change up your whole defense to try to accommodate what they're trying to do. It's not really feasible to do that. And that it becomes a challenging puzzle. And I think that's true for the Vikings defense. So they're going to do what they're going to do. The Vikings defense likes to dictate to the offense, and that involves disguising their coverage. Could they be successful without it? I think probably to some degree, but I think that's it's integral. It's fundamental part of their defense is the rotations, because you don't necessarily know what they're going to rotate into or out of. Or sometimes they bluff and they stay in the same coverage. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I also think uh, I think their complex disguised defense has not come back to bite them at all yet this year as well. Kind of shout out to Johnny did his preview for the Patreon, which I got to watch earlier, and shout out to him. So he noticed an interesting element that for a defense that is as complicated as this, with as many moving parts and as much disguise, there are a shockingly low number of coverage busts and big plays that are allowed. That's usually the double-edged sword, right? Is, hey, yeah, sometimes you can make a quarterback's brain fall out of their head with all this disguise, and they'll make terrible mistakes. But at the same time, with all that disguise and all that complexity comes defenders who wind up miscommunicating and in wildly the wrong place, and you wind up with 70-yard touchdowns. They have allowed a extremely low number of big plays, very few coverage busts, which is impressive for a defense as complex as they are. So I don't know that they would see the benefit in avoiding their complex coverages. Again, if they had been experiencing some of the negatives to this, maybe they'd say like, oh yeah, maybe we'll go away from that to avoid our side effects, because we don't need it against the Eagles. But they don't have any side effects so far, especially because I don't think their complexity is necessarily the root of their run game issues as well. Their defensive front is really aggressive, and maybe that plays in some ways, but I think their complexity doesn't necessarily dictate that. I think that's just their play style, and they're not particularly big either. They get pushed around a lot, and they wind up out of position a lot, and they give up a lot of big runs for that reason. I don't know that removing complexity is necessarily going to fix that. And again, they're not having coverage busts, so I don't know that they have a problem that would encourage them to remove the complexity from their defense.
Yeah, and their run defense, I don't think it's just like outright bad. I think it's kind of a binary thing where yes, it's true that they get pushed back in the interior and they'll lose that way. Yes, it's true that the back seven will overcompensate and lose their leverage over converging to the middle. But when they know a run is coming, obvious run situation, short yardage, formation tips it off, etc., they're good against the run and they'll stuff you. And that this is where it comes in. The Eagles come into play because they've been quite predictable in their runs. And if they think they're going to come in here and be like, oh, we're going to bully them just because they rank 25th against the run, but they know what you're going to do, it's not going to work.
Right.
So do you have anything more to say about Eagles offense versus Vikings defense before we flip it over to the other side?
No, I think as I mentioned earlier, the big thing that I'm looking for is, are we going to take, you know, how I'm going to put on the rose-colored glasses here. How much do we want to believe in Saquon's excitement, and how much do we want to believe in? This part is maybe a little more legitimate. How much do we want to believe in the fact that Jeff Stoutland is still the run game coordinator, just like he was last year? So this offense, I would certainly hope, has not just forgotten how to run so many of their concepts that worked so well, and that they seem to be not running very much this year. Um, are they going to get back to those things? Because it seems like everything is in place for them to do that. Let's see if they can do it successfully.
I'm a little surprised they think Toth is better than Pryor.
Yeah.
And I'll mention this. Last thing I'll mention this on the defense. there's a little thing that the Vikings do is a lot of times they'll stack the line, and Cam Jurgens referred to this as junk fronts. Okay, so this is when they'll just have, you know, a million guys, whether they're standing or down, a bunch of guys, 6, 7 guys on the line. And what I noticed is when they're all tightly packed in the center, they'll drop the edges and they'll bring like 4 guys straight in the A and B gaps, and they'll sometimes get a guy free right up the middle. But when they have 6 or 7 guys and they've got like pretty good spacing across the line, they'll tend to drop 2 guys in the middle and they'll bring more heat, maybe an overload or just guys off the edges. So the last thing is they love to pair all of these looks with stunts, specifically off the offense's left side. I literally guarantee that they're going to run a sim pressure stunt with Grenard attacking the Eagles left guard. I guarantee they're going to do this. It's probably going to work too. So, you know, I think coming into some of these pressure defenses, the Eagles have over-indexed on what is our plan versus the blitz, and it's been good. Like a lot of their plans against true blitzes, cover zero, has been good. When it's been sim pressures, not as good.
Yeah.
I wouldn't over-index on that. I would just kind of use your heuristics, like they're kind of running a rush 4 up the gut, or they're going to have the overloads with a couple stunts, and just try to operate as normal. Because really you need to come in and be like, what are our cover 2 beaters to all their different variations? That's the thing that I would put, you know, 75% of my mental resources into trying to figure out. So flipping onto the other side, Carson Wentz.
One thing I'll say real quick first is despite that, because I agree with you, I don't think the Eagles want to wildly overcorrect. Despite that, though, I think if Philly has a good day, it is probably in part because Cam Jurgens had a good day. Like, I have a hard time seeing the Eagles winning this game and Cam Jurgens having a bad day. You know what I mean? Like, if the Eagles won, it was probably because Cam Jurgens had a pretty good day. Maybe not even just individually blocking, but like making sure that everyone is picking up assignments correctly. You know, like if this Eagles offensive line is wildly disorganized, possibly due to Cam Jurgens, and it's a bad day, that's going to be his fault. Alternatively, if they handle some of these sim pressures and, you know, interesting looks, it might be in part to Cam Jurgens kind of like directing things well up there. So it's going to be a big day for him.
When people are watching the game, if the ball is not out at the top of the drop, unless Hurts is taking off scrambling, it's going to end in a bad play probably. You can see so many examples on tape of quarterbacks trying to find room in the pocket, moving around, trying to extend the play, hit, you know, players in the scramble drill, and generally it leads to like sacks, throwaways, or passes into coverage. So if I'm coaching the Eagles offense, I'm coming out, I'm definitely getting at least 4 guys out in a route, if not 5. I don't think trying to max protect against this team is going to be effective at all. I'm going to try to dial up all those cover 2 attackers that I just mentioned earlier in the podcast. And I'm going to say, if those first and second guys aren't there, I want you taking off up the gut. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my approach.
I agree.
So flipping on the other side, all indications are that Carson Wentz will be starting. JJ McCarthy was limited in practice. They said he will not start unless he's 100%. Now, to what extent is that coach speak? We'll know Sunday. But all signs point to Wentz, especially they have a Thursday game coming in after that. So it would make sense that McCarthy would start the following week after the Chargers game. So when I went and watched Wentz, I thought he's bad. I thought they are trying to mask a lot of his weaknesses by dialing up a lot of quick game. The second that he doesn't get the ball out quick, it starts tilting towards disaster. I specifically noted this. He scrambles like a wounded giraffe. He doesn't have nearly the speed that he used to have. And he'll do that thing where he's like double clutching and not sure where to go and sometimes throws it into harm's way. So I want the Eagles to aggressively condense space on his first read. When he drops back, wherever his eyes go, I want them to converge on that area of the field. And a lot of times it's going to be Justin Jefferson.
Big time.
And it's easier said than done. The Eagles should come out and bracket Justin Jefferson every single play. But how about when he's in a bunch? How about when he's in a stack? How about when they use him in fast motion? How about when they use him in the slot? It's not feasible to just say double him anywhere as he goes, but there are calls that will roll the coverage towards his way and try to kind of box him in, where you have a guy outside, you have a guy inside, you have a guy capping any verticals. I want them to lean into that. You look back to the Cowboys game, they did not do that against CeeDee Lamb, and he destroyed him. And I was scratching my head. Why did they not recruit more resources to stop CeeDee Lamb? I still don't know the answer to that. The same thing with Puka Nacua. And all those guys present the same problems. They'll move them around. They'll put them in the slot. They'll put them in alignments and formations that make it harder to do that. Give them switch releases. There's a lot of different ways to do this. But that doesn't mean you just put the white flag up and say, oh, we're just going to run our standard coverage. I would be obsessive about it because I don't think the Vikings have a sustainable offense if they don't have Justin Jefferson going for big yards. I don't. Go ahead.
Another quick shout out because it's right off of what you were just saying. Another quick shout out, Johnny again, with an interesting find in his film review for the preview on the Patreon. Johnny found that there is not one deep completion that the Vikings have had to anyone other than Justin Jefferson that wasn't caused by a coverage bust. Basically, the only time they have thrown the ball deep to anyone other than Justin Jefferson was a coverage bust. And I don't mean like almost all the time or most of all the time, literally zero deep completions to people not named Justin Jefferson except for coverage busts. So you're right. I mean, it is Justin Jefferson, and Justin Jefferson who that their offense funnels through, especially when it comes to anything down the field whatsoever.
And if you think about it, like just comparing that with the Eagles who go, oh, darn it, they're rolling coverage towards AJ's way and they're zoning off. So now we can't get it to him. Meanwhile, the Vikings are like, oh, everyone knows this is who we're going to go to. We don't even have another receiver nearly the caliber of Devontae Smith, but he can just go for 100 yards every game anyway. I mean, that is an indictment on the offensive staff, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Why do you only move the Z? Like, you're telling me you can't move the X receiver? Why can't you put him in trips bunches? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why aren't they doing more like 3 trips bunch with him isolated out wide just to give a lot more space? And they've had success doing that. There's a lot of whys. You had something?
Yeah, I was gonna say for that reason as well, because as you mentioned, there are ways that you can roll coverage, but there are also ways that they can combat that. For that reason, and there's like there's different theories about when you have your corners match up with guys. There's different theories about that, right? Do you put your best on the best, or do you put your best on their second best and then you double their best, right? This is one of those games where I would say don't get cute, right? Don't let them manipulate Jefferson around so that you wind up with Jefferson and Ringo one-on-one, or Jefferson and whoever it is, Adoree Jackson, dear Lord, one-on-one. No. Don't get cute. Put Quinyon on Justin Jefferson, and if you can double Jefferson and have Quinyon on him at the same time, cool, that's even better. But if they get creative and it winds up being one-on-one, at least you've got Mitchell on him and not Ringo or Jackson or whoever the heck else they have trotted out there.
Yeah, and there are ways that you can essentially maintain a consistent zone structure and then just have one guy follow all across the field. So we'll see what they do if they do that. I do think there are times where it's not that feasible. Like, if they're 2-by-1, Justin Jefferson isolated, and then they run like fast motion across, that could be tricky. Um, but I agree with you. Like, for the most part, I would want, Mitchell to be shadowing Jefferson. And yeah, I mean, another thing I mentioned earlier is wherever Wentz is looking, that's where you want the coverage to start working. Now, that might be at odds with the way the defense plays, because a lot of times they're playing match coverage and they're reading the routes as opposed to the quarterback. Now, there's one guy who tends to be reading the quarterback all the time, even when he's not supposed to. It's Andrew Makuba. So maybe Makuba gets his first interception against Wentz because he can't stop looking at the quarterback. And that would be my one bold prediction for this game. Now, I don't think the Vikings run offense is that good. There are two things though. They'll almost every game they'll start out with a quick toss to the outside. They've generally been pretty successful. That Eagles stink at holding the edge. And then they'll start to run motions into like the second and third quarter and run more inside after that. If you try to arm tackle Jordan Mason, it won't work. So the Eagles, they've gone through bouts of bad tackling. They've had better tackling. I don't know what's the reason to that. Um, Probably injuries, probably some players trying to make up for the deficiencies of other players. But it's going to be one of these games where you have to wrap up. We're going to need, like, honestly, let's call it for what it is. The edges, we know they're not going to be great. We need Cooper, DeJean, run fills to be better. And it's asking a lot, right? He's still probably in his like 24th game in his career, something around that. And I wouldn't have expected him to be like tremendous in that area coming in, but they need it. And you watch film from the last couple of games, and he's getting sealed off constantly against receivers, against tight ends. And sometimes it's great blockers, and that's a tough ask, but like they need it. So, you can't always ask Blankenship and Makuba to fly up from depth and make tackles while the rest of the defense is spilling, especially with the edges not setting a good edge. So they're going to need DeJean for sure. If they can keep, go ahead.
This is also where I wonder. You mentioned Blankenship. This is where I wonder if we maybe finally see, a Blankenship game here. Not that he's one to take over games or anything like that, but he's had a rough start to the year. But and again, maybe I'm rose-colored glasses. I like Blankenship, so maybe I'm biased here. But uh, he's had a rough start to the year. But I tend to think that this is something that he's going to turn around from, because you look at all of the change that is around him. There was one game in particular. It was when I'm trying to remember who was against now. It was when Bennett had to come in due to injury, right? And Bennett got a little bit picked on. It was like a 2-minute drill, right? Bennett came in, and between every play, between every single play, you saw Jacorian Bennett wildly turning around and gesticulating at Reed Blankenship, desperately trying to figure out what in the world is it that I'm supposed to do on this play, right? And Reed's trying to talk him through. I think Reed Blankenship is probably doing a lot of coaching when he's supposed to be playing, and I'm wondering if that might be impacting his play some. And you start to wonder, as guys get more and more comfortable. We saw last year, right? This defense got stronger and stronger and stronger as players got more and more and more comfortable in the scheme. You kind of hope that, maybe as players get a little bit more comfortable, Reed can start focusing on what he's supposed to be doing during the play rather than what the other 8 guys in the secondary are supposed to be doing in the play.
Yeah, it's a great point. Now, personally, I think he's been pretty decent. I don't think he's played bad. There's been a couple low lights that maybe people will point to. But I do think your point is valid. And I think you could extrapolate that to Bond, because last year N'Kobe Dean wore the
Mm,
green dot, and Bond was just instinctive flying around. But now he has to give the call. He has to quarterback the defense. He's trying to do everything, and it's he's not like he's still great, but I don't think he's maximizing what he could be. And who knows what N'Kobe Dean is coming back from this injury, but there's merit to like you get into some of these rundowns, neutral downs, and you take Campbell off the field, you put Dean in there. Is it, like who is he? Like I guess Bond still has to be the green dot wearer because he's going to be on the field every single snap. But it would be nice if they could like offload that responsibility from him.
yeah.
So it's
Hard to do that to Campbell, because if you're not gonna, if it's not going to be Bond, it probably has to be Campbell. That's hard.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So
Yeah.
actually, I want to ask you about this. So there's
Mhm.
been a lot of talk about should they move Jihad Campbell to edge? Are they going to play 3 linebacker sets? I guess I'm being a little bit harsh about people who are suggesting these things. But
I even suggested the 3 linebacker sets a couple of weeks ago, but that was specifically when we were preparing for Denver, who occasionally will send out a formation with 0 wide receivers in it. um, but yeah,
yeah,
go
so
ahead.
like let's pretend that we know N'Kobe Dean is a useful player to this defense. Let's assume that his health is good. What do you do? What would be your plan?
Man, that is hard. I to be honest, I don't have a great answer for that. From the moment that we picked Jihad Campbell, that thought has kind of flashed through my head. Of man, cool, we got Jihad Campbell. Crap, what are we gonna do? Right? Because playing 3 linebackers is not. I mean, like I don't know. Maybe it happens a couple times a game. Maybe, if that. Uh, but the vast majority of the time, we're only having 2 linebackers out there, and we have 3. What do you do? Um, I don't have a good answer for that. Could he maybe play some edge? Sure. I think there was, right after we drafted him, there was there was so much discourse going back and forth of, whether or not he was going to play edge or whether or not he was going to play linebacker and, that kind of thing, whether or not he was going to do some of both. And I tended to fall in the camp. I think you did as well of, can he play some edge? Yeah. Should he? Probably not, right? He's done it some, sure. Doesn't mean that he's amazing or great at it, especially at an NFL level. Um, so
I
the
wish I could
flexibility is
remember.
nice.
There was some prominent member of at least one, if not multiple, prominent members of like Eagles or NFL media who started to champion this whole thing. And he was the number 1 edge recruit coming out of high school. He played there at Alabama. He's got comparisons to Micah Parsons, and that is all lip service. If you put on the film, he had 0 bull rush. He had 0 pass rush moves. He is a lean, limber, tall guy with no anchor. It is ridiculous. Now, if you told me in 3 years he put on 5 to 10 pounds of lean mass and he worked in the off season with specialists who teach pass rush and so on and so forth, could he get there? Yes. He
Yeah.
has amazing juice. Like his get off could be Nick Bonito like. He can get up the field with violence. Yes, there's potential there. But the idea of putting him out there now as like a bona fide edge, I think is absurd.
Right. And
I
he
Yeah.
pairs interestingly with Bond in that if you told me that he's almost like, meant to be the clone or be injury insurance for Bond or whatever, because we see Bond step down to the edge, fairly frequently. That's what the Eagles can do sometimes to throw curveballs at the other team's offense, especially with their blocking schemes right before the snap when suddenly we go from a 4 to a 5-man front like that. if you told me, hey, part of the logic of picking him up is so that we can do that with either one of those guys, I'd say like, okay, I'll buy it. Does he have to do that full time? No, Bond doesn't do that full time, right? Like Bond is off ball plenty. It's just sometimes he'll step down onto onto the line and kind of like throw a curveball at the defense. Um, if you told me like that's all we expect from Jihad Campbell, I'd say cool. And you know what, that makes sense. He's played enough edge that it's certainly not like alien to him. He's done it before. Sure, you can have him walk down and be on the edge, and it's not going to be like you walked somebody down. It's not like you walked a safety down onto the edge or something like that, right? But yeah, to suggest that he can just full time play edge is a whole different animal.
I want to say something about this. There's a big misconception. His edge snaps, like you mentioned, they're all in 5 and 6 man fronts, 5-1, 6-1. The duties of that player is a far cry from someone who's asked to play as a 5 technique. And you're potentially like playing a heavy technique and slanting inside and trying to take away interior gaps and spill runs to the outside. It's a disaster. It makes no sense whatsoever. So can he come in? He will be worse than Patrick Johnson. I honestly believe that. Now, like once again, in the future, sure, he could develop into that. But like, and I as of in the 5-1 fronts, I think it's passable. Like it's
Yeah.
nothing great, but I think it's passable. And you can run clever stuff off that, stunts, or have him drop anyway when he's lined up there. There's a lot of things you can do there. But like the idea of going out there and nickel him as a 5 technique on like 1st and 10, I think it's laughable.
Yeah, he's really set up to be able to do Zach Bond's job. And like that's cool. That's awesome. That doesn't mean he could do Josh Sweat's job. It's a wildly different situation. They are not comparable.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to see if there's anything else here. Like, if the outside chance McCarthy plays, he's been volatile. He's had flashes of maybe like 14 good minutes of football and then like 50 minutes of bad football. So
you mentioned earlier that Wentz is bad, and I agree with you, but I held off in that moment, and I'm going to do it now. I almost went with the controversial thing and said, but they should maybe play him anyway, like even if McCarthy is healthy, because McCarthy has not looked great either. Now he's not a rookie, but essentially a rookie, right? This is his first real playing opportunities, and he's green as could be. So I'm not saying that he's bad or going to be bad, but he's been pretty bad so far. They might stand a better chance to win this game with Wentz than they would with McCarthy.
Yeah, I really don't know the answer to that. One, I think it's obvious they use a lot more quick game when Wentz is in there, and I think that's where the differences lie. When Wentz gets the ball out quickly, I think he's fine. As we mentioned earlier, when he starts holding it, getting to later second and third reads, trying to scramble, it's bad. Now, McCarthy is a little bit different because I don't know necessarily if you trust his eyes, but they run a lot more longer developing concepts, at least in the small sample size that he was in. And as the play extended, he seemed to get better. Right. He like needed the time and the space for things to develop. And then he has a laser, but he only throws the laser. He never makes layered throws. That goes back to college. So that I think that's where they're different. McCarthy's fast, but I don't think he's very good at scrambling either. So, well, I do think Wentz is going to play. If I were the Eagles defense, I would, they're going to run these like switch release hitch routes that kind of go into the alley. Same thing, curls to Hawkinson. They like to get the chains moving or early downs on those kind of plays. Take those away. Recruit tons of extra resources to get Jefferson in crowded areas. Converge on Wentz's first read. take away the outside toss early. And if you do those things, I think the Vikings are going to have a heck of a time putting up points. They're probably going to get got with Jefferson a couple times. You're probably going to arm tackle Mason, and he'll go for a couple decent runs. But we coming up on the hour mark here. We broke down everything about this game. Now let's get the Jimbo prediction, because you are 1-0.
I am
currently.
1-0. Ugh. Unfortunately, yeah. With Denver hit the loss exactly 4 points. I didn't have the total points right, but I had us losing by 4 and we lost by 4. So, ironically, after a Denver loss and after a bad Giants loss, I'm strangely optimistic. Again, it's probably these rose-colored glasses of mine here, but I just really badly, and I'm trying to hope it into existence. I really badly want this 10-day stretch to be the mirror of our bye week from last year, right? Where things finally turn around and the issues go away and we start to click, and that I'd love that to be this moment. And I keep bringing up Saquon Barkley's comments because that's what I'm clinging to, is the evidence that the moment is coming. So in that vein, I'll predict that we win this one. I mentioned earlier that I could see it going one of two ways. If the Eagles offense is able to make the adjustments, pound the rock, break out some of our run concepts that we've been far too vanilla about, and also push the ball down the field, right? Avoid throwing into these bad cover 2 beaters, or lack of beaters, we should say, that you highlighted. If we're able to do that, I think we're successful. And I think our defense can do enough. Maybe have a little bit of a bounce back here. Maybe like you've pointed out, get into Wentz's head a little bit, have him struggle, have old 2020 Wentz show up in our lap. So I'm going to say 28-14 Eagles.
Yeah, if the Eagles score 28, I think it would be from multiple pick sixes from Wentz. I would be stunned if they're able to put that up against this Vikings defense. This is the facts. The things that the Eagles struggle with are exactly what the Vikings defense is good at. And the Vikings offense is operated by Carson Wentz, potentially against an angry defense that's getting Jalen Carter and Quinyon Mitchell back. You're potentially going to be experiencing an ugly game of football. But I had the Vikings squeezing this one out 17-13 in an ugly one. One last question we got here from Yako is, have you considered running mesh against zone? Yeah, it's funny enough. Not that I had anything to do with it, but we started calling him out for running China against too high zone and it getting completely bottled up after the first couple of weeks. That went away. Then we started criticizing them about the wrap in. Oh, and that went away. Then there was criticism about running mesh on 3rd and long against zone. That went away. So it's almost like the Eagles are getting bullied out of their staple concepts that aren't working, which is great. But they need good ones to replace those. And until I see it, I'm going to be skeptical. The Eagles have a path to victory because they're facing Carson Wentz. He stinks.
So you were saying that they're getting bullied out of these things. The other possibility that you're leaving out is, hi Nick, good luck this weekend. I mean, maybe they're just watching you.
Yeah, well, if you're watching, glance routes, double post, halfback screens, quarterback design runs, QB lead up the middle, a run out of tight alignments at the safety's toes when they're in too high pre-snap, and run a 15-18 yard stop route, you're welcome. So until next time, This has been another episode of The Edge. Go Birds.
Go Birds.